Unlock the secret to unstoppable human potential. Discover the 5 principles of human performance and ignite transformation for your people, teams, and entire organization.
I'm Karen Avari, coming to you from sunny Scotland. Again, happy days.
And I am Nuala Gage in a rainy Johannesburg with the Toto song playing in my head, Rains Down in Africa. So if you hear any thunder or rain...
Okay, that song is now in my head.
We are the Safety Collaborators.
And our mission is to help people change the way they think about safety. And our ethos is to make a difference. And that's what we're doing here. And so you can read this rather interesting post that you came across.
So yes, thanks, Kaz. So this is a live post that was put up in a public forum for somebody looking for advice. And I think it's a wonderful introduction before we dive into the 5 principles of human performance. I have a question, please. I have a workshop cleaner who was asked to go and clean under the generator. The generator is in a closed area with a gate and signs saying keep away when the generator is running. The worker ignored this and opened the gate and started mopping under the generator while it was running. His mop got caught in the radiator fan and caused damage to the tune of about $1,500. I made a suggestion to the worker that the company will pay half the amount for the damage and he will have to pay the other half over a period. I would not deduct more than 25% of his salary per month. Am I legally allowed to do this? I would like to know before I start deducting.
Oh, I'm still blown. And how is that even a question? We'd love to hear how you react to this, because we're still gobsmacked.
There are just so many things that come into this, so many questions that I have. And I actually tried to connect with the person who wrote this post to get a better understanding of where are they coming from? Because the one thing that we have learned with safety and safety culture is that people don't know what they don't know. And part of our role is to help people broaden their understanding and their thought process of how what maybe you are doing is actually impacting your teams, your people, your workers, your staff, and in the end, ultimately impacting the organization. And Karen, when I first read this to you, your first comment was, well, is the worker okay? Surely that should be the first thing. Like, does this poor person need medical attention? Did something else go wrong? How is the human being behind this? And did he wake up that morning and go, today I'm going to break the generator with my mop?
No. And I'm dying to know what people's thoughts are on this. And unfortunately, we couldn't find out when we tried to track this down. But however, there are so many assertions or assumptions and judgments and things that can come out of this. One of the first things is, well, let's not jump to conclusions here. We don't know enough. But on the surface, I think it's a great introduction to the 5 principles of human performance.
Absolutely. And we will come back to this paragraph a couple of times.
Yeah.
Before we do that, you introduced me to the 5 principles of human performance last year, and I think they are incredibly impactful and amazing and really do have the capacity to transform an organization with a deep focus on them. So maybe could you just share a little bit about how did you find out about Todd Conklin's work?
I mean, I've always been curious about the different modalities and how do we look at safety differently, and that's kind of the beginning of that journey. So there's all sorts of good players out there. And we're in the middle of one of our clients having conversations, and we're redesigning a program, funny enough, that I ran 15 years ago. I now have the great pleasure of converting it into a new program. And it was through those conversations that, we're talking about the different thoughts around safety today versus what we were thinking it was 15, 20 years ago, which was really the heyday of the BBS world, or the behavioural based safety side of things. And so when we were talking, the BBS side of things tends to be a little bit more on the blame side of human performance. It sort of goes to the worker. It was very focused on the worker and what they are doing. And interestingly, if I think of this paragraph, it leans that way, although I'm not sure it's behaviour-based safety, but per se. But however, it's very much, well, it's the person that just used the mop in the wrong way. Well, what happened about the question before he went and mopped? The instruction that was given. So there's a lot to unpack here. So really that's how that came about. So I immediately went and bought the book and the audio book, and I thought, oh my God, this is great stuff. So much so that we're going to use it as a bit of the framework for the new program, in fact, the 5 principles of human performance.
And when you introduced me to it, it was such an eye-opener. And I think I listened to it twice in a row on a long flight with an audio book, making copious notes. And I was just like, if we can get enough people to be exposed, to be excited about this, we can make a difference.
I'd love to hear from you. What was it that really sparked you before we list what they are?
I think one of the things that I've always done, and you know, in a past life, I used to be chairman for a lot of disciplinary hearings. And my question was always going one step back. So when people would show me a root cause analysis, I would often say, I'm sorry, but you need to dig deeper, because I do not believe that this is the root cause. What else is behind it? How has the organization encouraged this kind of behavior? How has it been allowed? How has this become a norm that the person who supposedly did the transgression or had an accident or caused something to go wrong believed that they were making the best decision in the moment to achieve the outcome they were asked to do? And it's not about the individual's behavior, like you were saying, linking it to the BBS, but it must be the worker's fault. They had to do something wrong. It's about taking it that step back and going, well, are we investigating or interrogating this poor person? And are we actually looking at the bigger picture and saying, how did the system, how did the way we react to things going wrong, how has previous learning happened that could either have continued things in a way that maybe the wrong way of doing things, or in that moment what someone felt was the right way of doing things happened? And is it the individual's sole fault, or do we need to take a step back and say, hang on, what is the bigger context here?
Yeah.
And I think it's such a short, I mean, it's a brilliant audio listen. I mean, I had it on, I think, a slightly faster speed because I do that often with audiobooks, but I think I listened to it in less than 3 hours. And yet it speaks to what got me excited about let's work with this.
Yeah, awesome. And I think what sparked me when it was first introduced to me was, I remember when I first started working offshore, and there was always something that didn't seem right. And I've been involved where there has been incidences, like major incidents on board, on site, and there was just this instant, like, how did this person get this so wrong? Or who can we blame? Who can we do things to? And the conversations around it were, personally, I think they were just toxic. So I'm glad to hear that we're shifting, you know, and there's some good people out there. So there's Todd Conklin, there's Nipun Anand, you know, these guys, there's Clive Lloyd. They're doing some great work in this space and shifting that conversation. So let's have a look at what are the 5 principles as per Todd Conklin's book. So this is actually from his book, The 5 Principles of Human Performance. Now, he did a lot of research around this when he was writing it, and interestingly enough, he didn't expect it to be such a winning book. He was just trying to get some of his stuff out, and writing is a great way to do that. And but of course, it's kind of taken the world that we work in, I suppose, by storm. So the first one is error is normal. You know, even the best people, the most intelligent, the wisest people in the world make mistakes. Blame fixes nothing. All it does is create shame and guilt and all sorts of horrible feelings and emotions. Learning, so number 3 is learning and improving are vital. So this is in an environment that takes us to where the learning teams, it becomes deliberate. We use the information to learn what to do next. Context influences behaviour. So our systems drive the outcomes. And if we think about the base of a safety culture or organisational culture, There are systems and processes that need to be put in place. There's systemic thinking, there's all sorts of other bits and bobs there. And those systems will drive the way people perform, whether it's consciously or not. And number 5 is how you respond to failure matters, meaning how leaders act and respond counts, which takes me back to your lovely story. Well, it's not lovely. How is this leader of this worker responding to this? How is they making it? If I think of this line, I would not deduct more than 25% of his salary per month. What?
Oh yes, I'm being so generous because I didn't just take the full amount off and leave the poor person starving.
Telling this person that they're going to pay for half of this after you told them to go and clean there. Interesting. So why are these so helpful and critical in high hazard industries? What do you think?
I think one of the first ones is you think of when an incident happens and what's the first thing is, one, you are completely, if you're the person involved, you are embarrassed. You do have that kind of like sense of shame. Depending on the severity, you kind of think, does anybody really need to know? Because what is the reaction going to be? And when you think of that whole interrogation versus investigation and, there's going to be this huge paperwork and I'm going to be criticized and what have you. And I didn't mean for it to turn out like this. People try and hide it.
Absolutely.
And there's a big difference between a violation and an intentional act against what is the process, the policy, or the procedure versus making a mistake.
Yeah.
And when we make mistakes violations or we make errors violations, we end up starting to have that blame culture and we end up having a culture where people hide things. You know, we fly a lot. And I can assure you that my flight from here to Amsterdam, Aberdeen, Istanbul, the pilots probably make about 5 errors an hour. They're not doing it intentionally. However, there are systems and processes and things in place to be able to catch those before it becomes an incident. But they're not being penalized. They're still flying me around. And it brings it back to, again, looking at that holistic, how do we influence the greater system to create safer work and people that are not afraid to speak up and say, I messed up here.
We're talking about the first principle today. So error is normal. And I think what you just described quite well with the flying thing is that, good systems are tolerant systems. But if we work in an environment where we think that, if you break the system, then you're making the errors, then it's you're to blame, that isn't going to work terribly well. So some of the key points of that first principle is things there. Error is normal. Error is not a violation, as you just described. It's also not always bad.
No.
Sometimes that error, it might be the difference between good and lucky, but sometimes they are good because they help us to innovate and to do the next best thing when we're doing that piece of work. But we also have to have an environment that allows us to speak up. So I think there's a lot of psychological safety in what we're talking about here. People feel safe to learn and safe to contribute and safe to speak up, then we will have change. We'll have a bit of innovation. And that's where that error is not always bad. But it's hard for some people to swallow that.
Absolutely.
Particularly we've come from a very engineering mind, I think. Not putting that out to the engineers at all. We wouldn't have a world that we're in without them. Not at all.
Absolutely. And like you were saying, it brings in a lot of the elements of psychological safety. So if you not quite sure what we're talking about here and you want to know a bit more about psychological safety and the 4 stages, I'd recommend that you go and listen to episode 6 of our podcast where Karen takes you through what is psychological safety, and it's really insightful. Going back to error, and that feeling safe to speak up. When we're not in that space, we don't catch the good catches and we don't possibly even report the near misses because it's a case of, whew, that was close, nothing happened. I'm going to just pretend that it didn't happen. Whereas actually that's where that innovation, that's where that let's rework the process can really come in and possibly save the next person from getting hurt. Cooking dinner. I'm pedantic about knives and this, that, and the next thing. I'm sure that when I'm preparing a meal, there are a couple of times when I have potential, things that I do wrong, whether it's, I made meringue the other day for a pavlova and I suddenly went, oh, I think I've overbeaten the eggs. because I was lost in
Oh, I thought you were going to say you put salt instead of sugar.
lost in my own little la-la land for a moment. You'll be happy to know the meringue worked out perfectly. It was absolutely amazing. However, I still went and kind of had a good conversation with my mother, and I was like, oh my gosh, I nearly ruined our dessert today. However, I caught it in time, and I'm comfortable to have that conversation and share it and say, okay, well, next time I know not to do that. And so does everybody else who was there for lunch, who might want to make a meringue.
That's not a guarantee that it won't happen again in the future, because we're human.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we're human. Right?
Yes.
People make mistakes. It's as simple as that. And we do it all the time. Even that thing about being in the car and going from A to B, you're not making a mistake particularly, but you're not focused always. And, you get to another point, you go, oh my God, I don't actually know what went on for the last 5 minutes.
Exactly. How did I get
that
here?
happens to us all the time on the job, particularly, when we're doing repetitive work and if the system isn't supporting us, if the capacity isn't right, if we don't trust the system, there's a whole range of points along that journey where error happens all the time. So it's how do we help the system to accept that there is error?
And not design systems for perfection.
You took the words out of my mouth. Exactly right. Where do we build in that tolerance? How can we build in tolerance? Most systems are not built with that tolerance. So I love this quote, and this is a direct quote from the book actually. The problem with being wrong is that before you know you are wrong, it feels right.
Exactly. It's never a choice, because then it's a violation.
Correct.
By saying that error was a choice, or asking people not to make errors or why they made the error, turns that error into a violation. And it's a very different dynamic. It's a very, very different dynamic, because then it brings in that guilt and that shame, rather than saying, okay, this was an unintentional deviation from the expected outcome.
Yeah.
So what do we do next? How do we maybe adapt the system? How do we adapt the process? How do we make sure that there's not just an after-action review or a lessons learned, but it really is taken as an opportunity for deliberate learning? Not thinking that it'll never happen again, but that hopefully anyone who's involved in that may kind of think, oh, hang on, this happened in the past. Am I needing to change the way I'm doing things?
So that's just an insight. We highly recommend that you actually read the book. We'll put a link to the book in our show notes. So really the takeaway from this podcast, and maybe you can add to this, is, think about error as being normal and not unnormal. I don't think that's good English, but you know what I mean, right? It is a normal part of being a human, and not abnormal, right? It's a normal part of being a human being. And it does not matter how clever you are or not. It happens to all of us. And I think if we can walk into everyday life not expecting, but appreciating that fact, actually, and then therefore not being surprised when something doesn't go quite according to plan. Now, generally speaking, catastrophe doesn't happen just from small errors. Right? Catastrophe happens for a whole range of reasons, and maybe as we go through the 5 principles, some of those will come to light. So I'm thinking, where's the error in if we talk about our little story that we shared up front, there was an error. The worker went and, it's interesting, they use the word ignored this sign, but I wonder if they did. Or they were just doing what they were told to do and made an error, a simple error, which costs, by the sound of things, a mop and a fan belt. But anyway.
All right, so we will continue to explore that as we work through the next principles. And in the next episode, we'll be having a look at principles 2 and 3, which are blame fixes nothing and learning and improving are vital. And then in the final of this 3 series episodes, we will look at context influences behavior. So having a look really that deep dive into systems and how you respond to failure matters, which I think is foundational to all of these principles. And really, really diving into that one.
Absolutely. So again, thank you for joining us today. Always, we do love to have these conversations. We hope that you're enjoying them as well. Feel free to share this podcast and to hit the subscribe button if you aren't already, if someone shared it with you. And it's on all major podcast platforms. You can connect with us via safetycollaborations.com, where you will find the show notes for this and all previous episodes, as well as how we might be able to support you in your endeavours around your safety culture and safety leadership. We're also easy to find on LinkedIn, either Nola Gage or Karen Avari, and you can follow our company page, Safety Collaborations. So till next week, stay safe and stay well.